The first signs appeared behind closed palace doors, where a private meeting that was never meant to attract attention suddenly became the center of royal speculation. Senior aides emerged looking uneasy. Advisors refused to answer questions. And when Prince William finally stepped out of the room, witnesses described a future king who looked visibly shaken. Whatever King Charles had just revealed was far more significant than a routine discussion. It was an order, one that could reshape the future of the throne itself. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. At first, the gathering was treated as nothing unusual. Private meetings happen constantly within royal circles, and most never become public knowledge. Yet something about this particular meeting immediately felt different. It had been arranged with unusual urgency, away from the normal schedule, and under a level of secrecy that even long-serving palace staff found difficult to ignore. Senior aides were reportedly instructed to limit access to certain corridors. Doors remained closed longer than expected. Even trusted household officials appeared uncomfortable when questions were raised. The atmosphere surrounding the discussion quickly sparked whispers that something extraordinary was unfolding behind palace walls. According to insiders, King Charles personally requested Prince William's presence, leaving little indication of what would be discussed. Such direct summons are rare enough to attract attention, but what made this meeting truly remarkable was the group assembled around the king. Reports suggest that senior constitutional advisors, legal experts, and longtime royal strategists were present alongside members of the king's inner circle. These were not the individuals typically called together for routine family matters. Their presence hinted at something much larger, something connected not only to the present but to the future of the monarchy itself. As the hours passed, rumors began spreading among courtiers and palace staff. Some believed the king was reviewing contingency plans. Others suspected discussions regarding succession were finally reaching their conclusion. For months, scattered reports had suggested that private conversations were taking place behind the scenes, conversations focused on the long-term stability of the crown. Most dismissed those claims as speculation. But now, those same rumors suddenly appeared far more credible. The pieces that once seemed unrelated were beginning to fit together. Then came the moment that intensified every suspicion. When William eventually emerged from the meeting, observers described a man carrying the weight of information he had not expected to receive. This was not the confident future king often seen during public engagements. Witnesses claimed he appeared deep in thought, unusually serious, and visibly affected by whatever had been discussed behind those closed doors. No statement followed. No clarification was offered. Silence became the palace's chosen response, yet that silence only fueled growing curiosity. As whispers traveled through royal circles, speculation became impossible to contain. Courtiers quietly suggested that a plan dating back decades had suddenly been activated. Some insiders pointed toward discussions that may have begun months earlier, hidden from public view, while the monarchy faced increasing uncertainty. Others believed the king had finally decided to confront an issue he could no longer postpone. Whatever the truth might be, one thing was becoming increasingly clear: this was not simply another royal meeting. It was a turning point. The more people searched for answers, the more mysterious the situation became. Every question seemed to reveal another layer of secrecy. Every rumor pointed toward a decision carrying consequences far beyond the present moment. And as William struggled to process what he had learned, those closest to the institution began to understand that the future of the crown might already be changing in ways the public could not yet see. But what shocked William wasn't merely the existence of the order. It was the hidden reason King Charles believed the monarchy could no longer wait. For years, King Charles carried the burden of preparing the crown for an uncertain future. Yet according to palace insiders, recent events transformed private concerns into urgent action. Suddenly, the king appeared determined to settle matters that had remained unresolved for decades. The revelation that had reportedly stunned Prince William did not emerge from a single conversation or a sudden decision made overnight. Instead, it was the result of years of growing concern, private deliberations, and difficult realities that King Charles could no longer ignore. Those close to royal circles claimed the king had spent much of his reign balancing two competing responsibilities. On one side stood his family, with all its personal loyalties, emotional bonds, and complicated relationships. On the other stood the crown itself, an institution that has survived wars, scandals, political upheavals, and generational change. According to insiders, Charles increasingly found himself asking a question that every monarch eventually faces. What must be sacrificed to ensure the institution survives long after its current guardians are gone? Reports suggest that concern over royal continuity became one of the king's defining priorities. Public scrutiny surrounding the monarchy had intensified in recent years, and every decision seemed to carry greater consequences than before. The crown remained respected, but it was operating in a world that looked very different from the one Charles inherited decades ago. Advisors reportedly warned that uncertainty, even when temporary, could create long-term instability. Quietly and carefully, discussions began focusing less on present challenges and more on what the monarchy might face 10 or even 20 years into the future. As these conversations deepened, historical precedents reportedly became an important part of the debate. Trusted advisors are said to have revisited some of the most difficult succession periods in royal history, studying moments when uncertainty created division and moments when decisive leadership preserved stability. The lessons were clear. Delays often created confusion. Hesitation frequently invited conflict. Strong institutions survived because difficult decisions were made before. Circumstances forced them into existence. According to palace insiders, those historical examples weighed heavily on Charles's mind. What made the situation even more remarkable was that William reportedly remained unaware of the full scope of these discussions. While the Prince of Wales continued carrying out public duties and preparing for the future role everyone knew awaited him, a separate layer of planning was unfolding behind closed doors. Senior advisors, constitutional experts, and trusted royal figures were allegedly examining possibilities that stretched far beyond immediate concerns. Each meeting added another piece to a puzzle that only a handful of people could fully see. At the heart of it all was a growing belief that time itself had become an increasingly valuable commodity. Reports suggest Charles had begun viewing the future through a different lens. Decisions that once seemed distant suddenly felt urgent. Matters that could have been postponed for years now appeared to demand immediate attention. Those closest to the king reportedly noticed a shift in his thinking. Discussions became more focused. Priorities became clearer. The emphasis moved away from preserving comfort and towards securing permanence. That shift brought its own emotional cost. According to royal insiders, Charles understood that protecting the institution sometimes required choices that would not satisfy everyone. Personal preferences, family expectations, and Long's assumptions could no longer remain the guiding force behind every decision. Instead, the king's attention increasingly centered on safeguarding the monarchy itself. The institution had to come first. Future stability had to outweigh present convenience. It was a philosophy that echoed through many of the private conversations reportedly taking place within palace walls. As these deliberations intensified, those involved began realizing they were approaching a point of no return. The plans under discussion were no longer theoretical. They were becoming real. Every historical lesson, every private concern, and every warning about the future seemed to be leading toward a single conclusion. The monarchy was entering a defining moment, and the king appeared determined to act before circumstances acted for him. What William had learned during that private meeting was only the beginning of a much larger story, one rooted in decisions made long ago and hidden from public view. As those concerns intensified, attention shifted toward a forgotten document that few outside the palace had ever heard mentioned. Hidden among decades of royal records was a document whispered about by courtiers but rarely discussed openly. Some believed it was merely symbolic. Others insisted it contained instructions capable of influencing the monarchy's future long after the king's reign had ended. The deeper palace insiders looked into the sudden urgency surrounding King Charles's private discussions. The more attention focused on a document that had quietly existed beyond public awareness for years. It was not something regularly referenced during official ceremonies or discussed during public appearances. Instead, it belonged to that mysterious category of royal records that seemed to live in the shadows of history, known only to a small circle of trusted advisors and senior figures within the institution. For generations, rumors had surrounded its existence. Most people dismissed those rumors as little more than royal folklore. Yet now, according to those familiar with recent developments, that forgotten document had moved from obscurity to the center of one of the most important conversations of Charles's reign. Reports suggest that senior advisors were instructed to retrieve the document during a series of highly confidential meetings. The request immediately attracted attention among those who understood its significance. Constitutional experts were reportedly consulted. Legal advisors reviewed historical precedents. Long-serving officials who rarely participated in routine discussions suddenly found themselves involved. Each step seemed to reinforce the belief that the monarchy was preparing for something far larger than a simple administrative adjustment. What made the situation particularly intriguing was the growing connection between the document and the future of the throne itself. References reportedly emerged to private royal directives, succession planning, and long-term institutional safeguards that had remained hidden from public view. According to insiders, these were not plans designed to address immediate concerns. They were intended to guide the monarchy through challenges that might not fully emerge until years into the future. The document allegedly represented decades of reflection, preparation, and strategic thinking about how the crown should evolve while preserving its core purpose. For Prince William, the revelations were reportedly both surprising and deeply personal. Sources close to palace circles suggest that details were shared with him that had never previously been discussed. Certain assumptions about the future suddenly appeared less certain. Long-held expectations were reportedly placed into a broader context. As each new layer was revealed, William began to understand that the discussions unfolding around him were connected to plans that had been developing quietly for years. What he had once viewed as distant responsibilities were now becoming immediate realities. Those who claim familiarity with the document describe it as far more than a collection of formal instructions. According to palace insiders, it reflected Charles's deepest concerns, hopes, and ambitions for the institution he would eventually leave behind. In many ways, it was said to be a reflection of how the king wished history to judge his reign. Every directive reportedly carried meaning beyond politics or protocol. Each decision pointed toward a vision of continuity, stability, and preservation. That realization transformed what had initially seemed like a constitutional matter into something far more emotional. As whispers spread through royal circles, speculation intensified. Questions began circulating about how these plans could affect future generations of the monarchy. Would the document reshape royal roles? Could it influence future succession decisions? Might it redefine responsibilities for those who would inherit the crown decades from now? With every rumor, curiosity grew stronger. Yet clear answers remained elusive. The palace maintained its silence, allowing uncertainty to flourish in the absence of official confirmation. That silence only deepened the sense that something historic was unfolding. Courtiers exchanged theories. Advisors remained cautious. Even those closest to the discussions appeared reluctant to reveal the full picture. The document had clearly become a critical piece of the puzzle, but many suspected it was not the final piece. There was a growing belief that an even more consequential decision remained hidden behind the secrecy, waiting to emerge when the timing was right. And as William continued absorbing the implications of what he had learned, it became increasingly apparent that the true significance of Charles's actions extended beyond paperwork, directives, or constitutional planning. Yet, the document itself was only part of the story, because Charles's final decision involved a far greater sacrifice than anyone expected. The moment the king's intentions became clear, William reportedly found himself confronting a decision unlike any he had faced before. It wasn't about power. It wasn't about titles. It was about the weight of duty and the cost of protecting a centuries-old institution. For much of his life, Prince William had understood that one day he would inherit the crown. That reality had followed him since childhood, shaping every responsibility, every public appearance, and every expectation placed upon him. Yet, according to palace insiders, nothing had prepared him for the full implications of what King Charles had just revealed. The private directive, the historic document, and the carefully guarded plans for the future were no longer abstract concepts discussed behind closed doors. They had become immediate responsibilities. And as the true scope of the king's intentions emerged, William reportedly realized that the choices ahead would demand sacrifices far greater than anyone outside royal circles could imagine. Sources suggest that the king's directive extended well beyond succession itself. It was not simply about who would eventually wear the crown. It was about how the institution would function, how future generations would be guided, and what responsibilities would be carried forward into a rapidly changing world. For William, this realization reportedly came with a profound emotional burden. Every decision now seemed connected to consequences that could stretch decades into the future. The role he had spent years preparing for suddenly felt heavier, more complex, and far more personal than before. Those closest to the prince claimed that one of the first people he turned to was Catherine. Throughout years of intense public scrutiny and private challenges, she had become not only his partner but one of his most trusted advisors. According to royal insiders, conversations between the couple grew increasingly serious as William attempted to process everything he had learned. The questions facing them were difficult. How would these plans affect the family's future? What changes might be required? And perhaps most importantly, how would they balance personal happiness with institutional duty if the two ever came into conflict? As William wrestles with these concerns, reports suggest that senior members of the royal family were quietly brought into discussions surrounding implementation. Private meetings reportedly took place away from public attention. Trusted advisors examined possible outcomes. Constitutional experts reviewed scenarios that could emerge in the years ahead. While official details remained hidden, there was growing recognition that the king's directive would require careful coordination if it were to achieve its intended purpose. The deeper these discussions became, the clearer it reportedly became that the decision carried implications far beyond the present generation. Certain royal roles could eventually be reshaped. Responsibilities might be redistributed. Expectations surrounding future heirs could evolve in ways that reflected Charles's vision for a modern monarchy. According to palace sources, these possibilities generated both support and concern among those involved. Some believed the changes were necessary. Others worried about the challenges such adjustments might create. Yet few questioned the seriousness of what was unfolding. For William, perhaps the most difficult realization was understanding how dramatically the order could influence public perception. The monarchy survives not only through tradition but also through trust. Every decision is examined, interpreted, and debated. Reports suggest William understood that implementing the king's vision could invite criticism, controversy, and intense scrutiny. Even decisions made with the best intentions might be misunderstood. Yet the alternative, avoiding difficult choices altogether, carried risks of its own. As pressure mounted, emotional tensions reportedly began rising behind palace walls. Family loyalties collided with institutional priorities. Private concerns competed with public expectations. Conversations that once seemed hypothetical suddenly felt urgent and unavoidable. The future king found himself standing at the center of a moment that could define not only his reign, but the future direction of the monarchy itself. Every answer seemed to create new questions. Every revelation exposed another layer of complexity. Yet despite the uncertainty, William reportedly understood one crucial truth. The king's directive was not driven by personal ambition. It was driven by a belief that the institution needed protection, even when that protection demanded sacrifice. Accepting that reality did not make the burden easier to carry. If anything, it made the responsibility even heavier. And as William struggled to reconcile duty with personal consequence, events behind the scenes continued moving forward, bringing new revelations that would soon transform the situation once again. But while William wrestled with the burden of the king's command, another revelation emerged that made the situation even more extraordinary. As details slowly surfaced, palace insiders began connecting the king's directive to a legacy stretching back through generations of monarchs. Suddenly, what appeared to be a personal decision looked more like the final chapter of a plan years in the making. The deeper people looked into King Charles's actions, the harder it became to view them as isolated decisions. What initially seemed like a private matter between a father and his heir gradually revealed connections to a much larger story, one rooted in decades of royal planning and centuries of institutional survival. According to palace insiders, the king's directive was not created in response to a single event or recent challenge. Instead, it reflected a philosophy that had guided generations of monarchs whenever the future of the crown appeared uncertain. As fragments of information began circulating through royal circles, a powerful narrative emerged. Charles was not simply making a decision for today. He was positioning the monarchy for tomorrow. Reports suggest that advisors involved in the discussions frequently referenced historical precedents. Throughout British royal history, moments of uncertainty have often forced monarchs to make difficult choices that were unpopular in the present, but essential for the future. Palace sources claim these examples became settled the conversations surrounding the king's directive. The lessons were strikingly similar regardless of the era. Monarchs who delayed difficult decisions often left instability behind them. Those who acted early, despite criticism, were later remembered for preserving continuity during periods of change. For William, these historical comparisons reportedly carried enormous significance. Until now, Much of his preparation had focused on understanding modern responsibilities. Yet the conversations unfolding around him were increasingly framed through the experiences of those who had worn the crown before him. According to insiders, William was introduced to examples of past royal transitions where personal wishes had been set aside in favor of protecting the institution. Some of those decisions created controversy, others generated resistance from within royal circles. Yet over time, they were viewed as necessary turning points that helped secure the monarchy's long-term survival. As these discussions continued, one theme reportedly appeared again and again. The directive was not being presented as a personal preference of King Charles. Instead, it was framed as a protective measure designed to strengthen the institution beyond his reign. Those close to the process claimed the king's focus remained firmly fixed on continuity. The crown had survived because previous generations understood that leadership sometimes required sacrifice. According to palace insiders, Charles increasingly viewed himself as part of that tradition, responsible for making difficult decisions before circumstances removed opportunity altogether. Perhaps most intriguing were the growing references to Queen Elizabeth's influence. While no official details emerged, insiders suggest that many of the long-term principles guiding current discussions reflected lessons passed down during her historic reign. Elizabeth spent decades navigating constitutional challenges, family tensions, and periods of public scrutiny. Reports indicate that some of her thinking regarding stability, continuity, and institutional responsibility continued shaping conversations long after her passing. To many within royal circles, her influence appeared woven into the very foundation of the king's plans. As word of these developments spread, curiosity intensified beyond palace walls. Journalists, commentators, and royal observers began piecing together fragments of information. Every new rumor sparked further speculation. Why had these discussions remained hidden for so long? What exactly did the king's directive contain? And why did so many insiders describe it as a defining moment for the future of the monarchy? The absence of clear answers only fueled public fascination. Inside royal circles, however, the focus reportedly remained fixed on a single objective: survival. Not survival in the ordinary sense, but the preservation of an institution that had endured for generations. According to those familiar with the discussions, every conversation eventually returned to that central question. How could the monarchy remain stable, respected, and relevant in the decades ahead? The king's directive increasingly appeared to be his answer. As speculation continued growing, the pressure surrounding the secret became impossible to ignore. More people were asking questions. More insiders were whispering about what they believed was unfolding behind closed doors. The carefully maintained silence that had protected the discussions for months was beginning to crack. And as anticipation reached extraordinary levels, senior figures reportedly realized that the circle of secrecy could not remain intact forever. And as speculation reached its peak, the palace realized it could no longer keep the truth hidden from those closest to the throne. When word of the king's order began circulating among senior royals, reactions were anything but predictable. Some reportedly viewed it as necessary. Others saw it as a dramatic turning point that would alter the monarchy forever. The secret could not remain confined to a small group forever. As information slowly spread through the upper ranks of the royal family, what had begun as a closely guarded discussion evolved into a matter that demanded wider awareness. According to palace insiders, senior family members were gradually informed about the king's directive, though not all at once and not with identical details. Each conversation reportedly carried its own tension, because those involved quickly understood that this was not an ordinary royal adjustment. The implications reached far beyond the present moment. The directive had the potential to influence the monarchy for years, perhaps even generations, and that realization immediately sparked powerful reactions. Reports suggest that some senior royals viewed the king's decision as both logical and necessary. From their perspective, the monarchy had always depended upon careful planning, particularly during periods of uncertainty. These individuals reportedly believed Charles was fulfilling one of the most important responsibilities entrusted to any sovereign: preparing the institution for challenges that might not yet be visible. To them, the directive represented foresight rather than disruption. It was a difficult decision, certainly, but one designed to strengthen the crown rather than weaken it. Others, however, reportedly saw the situation very differently. According to palace sources, concerns emerged about how such a significant directive might be interpreted both within royal circles and by the public. Some worried about unintended consequences. Others questioned whether certain aspects of the plan could create fresh complications rather than resolve existing concerns. While few openly challenged the king's authority, insiders suggest there were moments of intense private debate. The future of the monarchy was at stake, and emotions naturally ran high. Throughout these discussions, Prince William reportedly found himself becoming the central figure around whom every conversation revolved. What had initially been a private revelation between father and son was now becoming a broader royal matter. Family members increasingly looked toward William, recognizing that the ultimate responsibility for carrying the king's vision forward would eventually rest with him. The pressure was immense. Every question seemed directed toward the future king. Every concern ultimately led back to the role he would one day inherit. During this period, Catherine reportedly became an essential source of stability. According to those familiar with the situation, her calm presence helped balance the uncertainty surrounding the discussions, while others focused on strategy, public reaction, and institutional implications. Catherine allegedly remained focused on maintaining perspective during a period of extraordinary pressure. Insiders suggest her support provided William with a degree of confidence at a moment when difficult decisions seemed to be multiplying by the day. Meanwhile, advisors reportedly worked tirelessly behind the scenes to prevent speculation from spiraling into controversy. Every conversation required caution. Every disclosure carried risk. Palace officials understood that premature leaks could trigger misunderstandings, capable of overshadowing the directive's intended purpose. As a result, communication remained tightly controlled. Information was shared selectively. Rumors were quietly monitored. The goal was clear: preserve stability while ensuring those who needed to know were properly informed. Despite growing concerns and differing opinions, reports suggest King Charles remained remarkably firm. Those closest to him claim he listened carefully to advice, considered alternative perspectives, and acknowledged the emotional weight of the situation. Yet his broader objective never changed. The future of the institution remained his overriding priority. According to insiders, Charles believed uncertainty posed a greater threat than controversy. Delaying action might preserve temporary comfort, but it could also leave future generations facing even more difficult challenges. As discussions continued, a common theme reportedly emerged among many participants. Regardless of personal views, nearly everyone agreed on the importance of preserving unity. Stability had to remain the guiding principle. The monarchy could not afford division at such a critical moment. Every conversation eventually returned to that same objective: protecting the institution while maintaining public confidence. Yet even as efforts focused on achieving consensus, many sensed that the story was still incomplete. Important pieces of the puzzle remained hidden. Questions remained unanswered. And although senior royals were now aware of the king's directive, few fully understood the final revelation that had influenced Charles's thinking from the very beginning. As anticipation quietly built behind palace walls, those closest to the discussions began realizing that the most significant moment had not yet arrived. Yet the most dramatic moment was still to come, because the king had one final message reserved exclusively for William. In what some insiders describe as one of the most emotional meetings of Charles's reign, father and son reportedly sat together without advisors, without officials, and without witnesses. What was said may never be fully known, but its impact was impossible to ignore. By the time this final meeting took place, months of speculation, private discussions, and carefully guarded planning had already transformed the atmosphere surrounding the monarchy. Yet according to those familiar with royal circles, everything that had happened before was merely preparation for this moment. The constitutional debates, the confidential documents, the consultations with advisors, and the conversations among senior royals all pointed toward a single encounter that would ultimately shape the future of the crown. For the first time since the directive emerged, King Charles and Prince William reportedly sat together completely alone, away from competing opinions, away from formal procedures, and away from the pressures that had surrounded every previous discussion. Sources suggest the conversation began not with strategy but with honesty. For years, William had seen his father as a monarch navigating an increasingly complex era. But during this meeting, insiders claim Charles spoke not only as a king, but as a father carrying the immense burden of responsibility. Reports indicate he explained the reasoning behind his decisions in greater detail than ever before. The directive was not simply a plan. It was the result of years spent contemplating the future of an institution that had defined his entire life. Every concern, every difficult choice, and every sacrifice had ultimately been driven by one overriding objective: ensuring that the monarchy remained strong long after both men were gone. As Charles reportedly shared his perspective, William began seeing the situation through a different lens. What had once felt like a heavy obligation imposed upon him gradually started to reveal a deeper meaning. According to palace insiders, the future king came to understand that the directive was never designed to limit his future. Instead, it was intended to protect it. The king allegedly described how every generation of royals inherits not only privilege but responsibility. The crown survives because those entrusted with it are willing to place duty ahead of personal comfort. It is a lesson repeated throughout royal history, yet hearing it directly from his father reportedly carried a profound emotional weight. The discussion is said to have moved beyond immediate concerns and toward larger questions of legacy. What kind of monarchy would William eventually inherit? What challenges would future generations face? And how could today's decisions influence events decades into the future? According to reports, Charles spoke candidly about the difficult balance between preserving tradition and adapting to change. The institution could not remain frozen in time, yet neither could it abandon the principles that had allowed it to endure for centuries. That delicate balance, insiders claim, formed the heart of the king's message. As the conversation continued, emotional tensions reportedly reached their highest point. For months, William had been wrestling with uncertainty, struggling to reconcile family loyalties, public expectations, and institutional obligations. Now, sitting across from the man who had carried those same burdens for decades, he reportedly gained a new appreciation for the sacrifices leadership demands. The king's words did not erase the challenges ahead. If anything, they made those challenges even clearer. Yet they also provided something equally important: understanding. Reports suggest that William gradually began accepting the full weight of the decision. The directive was no longer something happening around him. It had become part of his future. Every responsibility attached to it would eventually become his responsibility. Every consequence would ultimately be his to manage. Yet, according to those familiar with the meeting, there was a noticeable shift in his perspective. Where uncertainty had once dominated, a sense of purpose reportedly began taking its place. For Charles, the conversation may have represented something equally significant. After years of preparation, planning, and reflection, he had finally delivered the message he believed his heir needed to hear. Not through documents, not through advisors, but directly, father to son. And while the precise words exchanged may never become public, insiders insist their effect was unmistakable. The meeting altered the way William viewed both the monarchy and his place within it. When the discussion finally ended, the future king reportedly left with a clearer understanding of what lay ahead. The questions had not disappeared. The challenges remained immense. But he now understood why the king had been willing to make such difficult decisions, and why those choices carried consequences far beyond the present moment. By the time that conversation ended, William understood exactly why the king's final order could define the next era of the monarchy. The order that stunned William was never simply about succession. It was about ensuring that the crown would endure long after today's headlines had faded. And in that moment, the future of the monarchy entered a new and uncertain chapter. As the significance of King Charles's final directive became fully understood, the atmosphere surrounding the monarchy began to shift. What had started as whispers behind palace walls had evolved into something far more profound. The questions, doubts, and uncertainties that once surrounded the directive gradually gave way to a growing realization that this was not merely a decision about who would inherit responsibility. It was about how that responsibility would be carried forward. According to palace insiders, William emerged from his final conversation with the king carrying a new understanding of what the future demanded from him. The burden remained enormous, but for the first time he reportedly viewed it not as an obstacle, but as a duty he was prepared to embrace. Those close to royal circles suggest that William's acceptance of the king's vision marked a significant turning point. For months, he had wrestled with difficult questions, balancing personal considerations against institutional needs. Yet the deeper he came to understand the reasoning behind the directive, the more convinced he reportedly became that the future of the monarchy required careful stewardship. The role awaiting him was no longer defined solely by tradition. It was shaped by responsibility, sacrifice, and a commitment to preserving something larger than any individual member of the royal family. As preparations quietly continued behind the scenes, many insiders began describing the moment as the beginning of a historic transition. not a transition measured by ceremonies or official announcements, but one defined by mindset and purpose. The monarchy was preparing for a future that would eventually place William at its center. Every discussion, every plan, and every carefully considered decision seemed connected to that reality. According to reports, the king's directive served as both a roadmap and a warning, reminding those involved that continuity could never be taken for granted. For King Charles, the directive increasingly came to be viewed as one of the defining legacies of his reign. While monarchs are often remembered for public achievements, state occasions, and historical milestones, insiders suggest Charles hoped to be remembered for something equally important: preparing the institution for the challenges that lay ahead. His focus, according to those familiar with his thinking, remained fixed on safeguarding the crown, rather than protecting personal interests. The institution itself had become the central priority, and every difficult decision reportedly flowed from that conviction. Within royal circles, the significance of the moment continued to grow. Senior figures reportedly recognized that they were witnessing more than a private family matter. They were witnessing a turning point in the story of the monarchy itself. Conversations increasingly focused on continuity, unity, and long-term stability. The crown had endured because each generation accepted the responsibility of preserving it for the next. Now that responsibility was gradually passing into William's hands. At the same time, the relationship between father and son reportedly evolved in meaningful ways. The months of difficult discussions, private meetings, and emotional conversations had created a deeper understanding between them. William no longer saw only the king making difficult choices. He saw the man who had spent decades preparing for leadership, and who now wanted to ensure that the next generation inherited not confusion, but clarity. According to insiders, that realization strengthened the bond between them during a period when both understood that time and circumstance were constantly changing. As the future king looked ahead, there was no illusion that the path would be easy. Challenges remained. Public expectations remained enormous. The pressures attached to the crown had not disappeared. Yet something fundamental had changed. The uncertainty that once surrounded the king's directive had been replaced by purpose. William now understood that the future of the throne rested firmly in his hands, not as a privilege, but as a responsibility that would shape every decision he made moving forward. And so, what began as a secret meeting hidden from public view ultimately became a defining moment in the continuing story of the monarchy. The king's final order was never simply about succession. It was about preserving an institution through foresight, sacrifice, and duty. It was about ensuring that future generations would inherit stability rather than uncertainty. Most importantly, it was about preparing the next guardian of the crown for the immense responsibility waiting ahead. Because while kings may come and go, the burden of the crown endures, and the king's final order ensured that the next chapter of that story had already begun. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.